Hello, hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard the Tabletop Express. This is Creators Corner, by the way.
Oh, it's been so long.
I know we
Yes.
are long overdue, so we're so overdue that we are both here. Very often, this has been
Wow.
like, no,
It's not even that.
no, I
How
know,
dare you?
no, I know.
So the thing is, so we're bringing on Kyle Rowan, and we like to reach out to different designers and different people in the industry for games that we love, and the thing is, like, Vagrantsong is a game that we both really enjoy.
Right.
So, in terms of who's going to interview him,
Oh, that was not gonna. That was. I said I was coming.
so without further ado, we're going to bring him on in 3, and 2, and 1.
There he
Hey,
is.
Kyle.
Hey guys.
Howdy. Welcome.
Yes, welcome aboard.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So this has been overdue because I think when we were talking about setting up a creator's corner, it must have been over a year ago.
It was a while.
Talking about it with you.
Yeah.
It was. It had to have been shortly. I mean, we had played Vagrantsong. We had talked. I know we had played through. I think at that point we might have even.
But we've done some videos.
We had,
of it
we've
on
done
the
some
channel.
videos for sure on the channel, but overdue, is the word. But we're excited that you're here, Kyle, and obviously in the midst right now, which we'll get into in a few minutes, in the middle of your Kickstarter for the expansion Encore and Off the Rails. But we're so thrilled to have you. So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for coming on Creators Corner, and excited to add you to that group of Creators Corner alumni, which is a great,
Whoa.
yeah.
Do I get a
alumni.
badge?
We're not going to ask you for fundraising.
No,
after.
no, that's not what.
That's how
what
I know
has-
alumni.
No, that's not. Alumni is a loving word.
I get it.
Let me start, Kyle, though, with something that I've asked everybody, because designers, illustrators, the board game people are superheroes in their own right, and so that means you deserve an origin story. And I got to know, what's your board game origin story? What's got you into the space and kind of interested in the world of tabletop gaming as a whole?
It must have been when I was a kid. Stratego, Risk, the classics. Um, yeah, definitely Stratego in particular. And I remember years later, after 12 or 13, after meeting my girlfriend, who's now my wife, I remember challenging her to Stratego, thinking that I was, awesome at the game. I played it 100 times. First time, she just stomped me, and
Nice.
that was the one. It's like, that's it. She's it. So we haven't played that game since. Too embarrassed to play that, but
Wait, no way. Really?
well, not actually too
No,
embarrassed, but it is
yeah.
true that we haven't played that game since. We
It's
played
funny
plenty of
because
others instead.
that Stratego, I love that you bring up Stratego, because that's probably my favorite, like, classic game. I have 2 copies of it, actually, the old classic style.
Yeah.
It's such a fantastic kind of introduction, and I think that game holds its own today. To be honest, I think it's still a really enjoyable game that you could bust out any time.
Yeah, and there's one of my Grail games is Lord of the Rings Confrontation, because of the things I've heard about the similarities with Stratego. I've never played it, but I'm a big Lord of the Rings nerd, so it seems like a combination of 2 worlds that I love. So
I haven't even heard of this one. I gotta pull that up. Oh, it's a Knizia game.
yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
fancy.
Now you're entering.
By the way, Mr. Rouse in chat says, "Hey, Kyle."
hello.
So, Stratego was that game. Now, how did you get from board game player to board game designer? Like, what got you interested in that aspect?
Well, it didn't go from one to the other.
Okay.
I actually started my career in video games first. My education is in video game design. My first project in the career was an indie game that unfortunately didn't make it due to funding. But it was like if you are familiar with the game Terraria,
No, I'm not.
kind of Minecrafty, side scroller
Okay.
Minecraft sort of thing, and we were making a game like that. Um, and then once that kind of imploded on itself, like a lot of indie companies do, Weird Games was hiring, and on a whim, I applied, and 7 years later, here we are.
Whoa.
So, yeah, it was on a whim, honestly. I'd been developing uh, RPGs for since I was like 12, 13. The play by post on forum stuff for a really long time. So it wasn't that I was completely unfamiliar with the space, but it's not like I was deep in board games when I dove in. So I'm still learning. I still haven't played Ticket to Ride, guys. So
I mean, it's okay. This is a safe space. We're not gonna shoo you away.
No, it's interesting though because you talk about just kind of diving in, which I feel like a lot. You hear a lot of people who talk about wanting to design and be in the space and do stuff, and it's challenging. I mean, you talked about. I mean, just the fact of previous project may not be a board game, but not reaching funding. So in an age where it is extremely competitive and there's more and more games coming out every year, I mean, you can debate when the quote unquote golden age is all day long, but we can't deny that right now is a very busy time for board games, to say the least, and a competitive one.
oh yeah.
Uh, for you, I have to want to know you've had some games obviously before Vagrantsong, but I do want to kick off a little bit with some conversation around Vagrantsong because obviously that's the topic of today. You've got a Kickstarter with 7 days left as we're recording this. That has at this point nearly 3,000 backers, which is
Yeah.
which is awesome, right? Uh, Talk to me a little bit about.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. If you could talk to me a little about, I want to go back a little bit to the origin of Vagrantsong and this world that you created. Can you talk a little bit about what you did as you kind of created it? Because I think it's a really interesting world, and it's something that certainly captured my attention the first time I played it.
Yeah, so it's kind of an amalgamation of all the things I'm kind of obsessed about. Um, my older brother, when I was 15, 16, gave me a Jack Kerouac book, On the Road. And since then, I've just loved his books. Dharma Bums is a story of a guy hopping on a train. Um, and I love horror movies. So it was just kind of and I love American folklore. So it's just kind of a mishmash of the things that I just love. At Weird, we were working on a dungeon crawler at the time, and the theme wasn't quite connecting with me. And I pitched maybe a dozen or so ideas, and Vagrant Song was kind of the last Hail Mary of like, you know what? I'm here. I'm gonna pitch the dream. Like the thing that I want to play above all else. Not really thinking about demographics or anything like that. This is the weird game that is for me, and luckily that's the one my boss said, yeah, green light, let's go. And a few years later it was done. So
That's awesome. Wait, and um, was Vagrantsong? I guess was that like your first like published like as game like head game designer game at this point?
no, so I'd worked on a bunch of projects up to this point. My first published project is actually a free print and play expansion to a game that Kevin Wilson made called Darkness Comes Rattling, and I developed an expansion for it that you can download on DriveThru RPG for free on that. Um, I worked on Maulifax, which is a miniature skirmish game. It's kind of Weird Games' flagship game, and Bayou Bash, which is the racing game that we've developed, which actually came out roughly around the time of Vagrant Song, but in terms of development, was about 2 years earlier.
Okay.
It had gone through some production nightmares that some games do, and So yeah, as far as the tabletop space, yeah, those are games that I've worked on. In addition to that, the other side, it's another skirmish game that Weird makes. That was my first project with Weird, actually, as an editor, working on all their stories. Um, and what else? Through the Breach, the RPG that we developed. I've had my hands in that as well. But
Yeah, let me get to this.
Vagrant Song was the first, like, I'm taking this idea from pitch to final production
Yeah.
of mine for sure. Yeah.
Right,
Uh,
so that was it, really the first like truly fully realized from start to finish. You were bringing this forward. I'm intrigued with Vagrant Song. I remember from my first experience, but it was a few things that jumped out to me. Obviously, the board. I had not been into skirmish games personally at the time. This one kind of spoke to me, but from you talk about that kind of a world and folklore. I'm interested, you know, what kind of things jumped out to you in the world of folklore that kind of contribute to this in terms of some of these specific legends, and do some of these monster, I don't call them monsters, the haints, do some of these haints come from just research you did or stories you heard? I'd love to learn more about the design, because I think the haints are fascinating, because you're not you're not fighting monsters in that sense, but you're trying to save them, and I think that is different in terms of usually a game like this you're trying to beat the monster and
right.
destroy it.
So in regards to the saving and healing mechanic of the game, that actually came from Final Fantasy III with the Phantom Train, if you're familiar with that, where you can give them a Phoenix down and that it's a huge heal. I think you might even be able to win. It's been so long since I've played that, but that whole healing as damage, like the against undead sort of thing, is where that came from. And it was fairly obvious in development once we realized, okay, we're doing ghosts. We're not going to be killing ghosts, so how are we interacting with them? So that system was something we stuck with fairly early on. But as far as like where the ghost came from and kind of my love for this sort of stuff is it's tough to nail down specifically. I watched a lot of horror movies as a kid with my mom, so I grew up with the stuff really early on. Killer Clowns from Outer Space is probably the first one I can think of that
Oh wow.
I watched as a kid that I just resonated with. But I mean, I grew up in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, so like I got to experience kind of the outskirts of the Appalachian lifestyle a little bit. Living in the woods and hearing stories about the Jersey Devil and that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's just always kind of been a thing I've liked. My all-time favorite movie is a movie called Ravenous, which is loosely based on the Donner Party, and you get to see even some of that in Vagrant Song. So yeah, like I said, it's just the game is just a mass collection of just like things I've always been obsessed with for in one way or another. Where specifically that came from, I mean, diving deep into like me as like 11-year-old kid, that's tough for me to pick away so many years later. It's now just part of my subconscious.
It came from the heart, then is where it came from, then
Right. Yeah.
that it's fascinating. And you did, I mean, Ryan's got these up on the screen, but it also included these really fascinating characters.
Yeah.
I know my favorite's the Runaway personally, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the Runaway. I got the shirt. I bought the shirt with the which always gets some great comments. But really interesting characters, and you talk about story, and you talk about writing story, but a lot of this game is story, because there's a story ongoing in it that can change and different based on what you're doing, and things can happen, and also has that kind of camp phase as well, where other stories can unfold. What was it, how much fun did you have with that part? Because I get a sense that you really like can get into and love that aspect of it, because you can feel it, I feel like, as you're playing it, that this was crafted with a passion, and kind of a drive to get the player really invested in the game.
I mean, when developing this, I did start from like a narrative direction first. It's I love creating story experiences that you're interacting with. The scenarios themselves, I wanted them to feel almost like movies in that you're piecing to get together as you go along. It's not a story dump at the first part of it, and you're just kind of messing around with some bits later, and then you got like an ending to it. I wanted you to unravel some of it throughout. I wanted there to be, escalating moments, a climax to each scenario, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, the narrative side is kind of it's always kind of the backbone of my designs as a whole. I just love that part. I've always loved writing. Even on the Malifaux side of things, I'm largely in charge of the story direction and what we're doing with our each expansion and that sort of thing. So that's just the kind of the stuff that drives me, and it's tough for me to think about game development without thinking about the stories involved, even if it's not like a direct story, like you're being told something or interacting with it. Just the water cooler moments or the experiences that two players walk away from, and that story, those are the experiences that that push me as a designer. So,
and honestly, for I mean, there's no. First of all, I really love Vagrantsong as a game, and
thank you.
You're welcome. But the parts that always shine the most for me in this game is how different those boss battles are. Like, granted, the basic mechanics, the actions that you're going to be doing, they're roughly, just the same thing. You allocate whatever you want to it, and you roll some dice and you succeed or you don't. The interesting part I found is how to apply those actions into specific strategies against these foes that constantly change. And we're talking just like, not just change from one boss does one thing versus the other, but throughout the game, they have two different sides a lot, or they have different ways on how they break the rules and how they want you to kind of play this scenario. And it's up to you to kind of like find that. And I feel like the strengths in Vagrantsong are reflected in that storytelling element with how the boss design is over anything.
Yeah, and that was a pillar from the start.
Yeah.
So I love large campaign games, but if I have to play 3 or 4 fights in a row where this one I'm fighting 3 guys, this one I'm fighting 5, maybe that one I'm fighting 7, I'm mentally checking out. I need a little bit of a mix up. So when developing Vagrantsong, we knew we wanted wildly different experiences from scenario to scenario, sometimes without even a boss on the board at all, something where it's just a puzzle that you have to solve. But yeah, making that was also really hard. It's essentially developing it. The core game is like 23 little games. So
Yeah.
that was a unique challenge. And when you do something like that, you do ultimately you're narrowing the demographic, because there is an obstacle to overcome in learning the new set of rules in every scenario, and we understood that. So rather than trying to widen the scope of who we were targeting, we knew this is just what we're doing. So if you like it, great. and hopefully you do. So yeah.
I do want to go. We have Rex, by the way, in the chat saying Vagrantsong equals life. So there you go. So that's a person who will.
And Rachel brought up that she would like to walk someday on the Appalachian Trail without the scary part.
I actually, when I was like 18, 19, me and a buddy were planning on doing that trail, and we were like a month before doing it, and he broke his leg in a way that it was impossible. So yeah, that was a dream of mine as well.
I was going to say one thing that fascinated me, and as you talk about, obviously you've got this core game you created that obviously was very well received. I think it's fair to say, and just to be transparent, I'm pretty sure we both, when we did our best of 2022 video, I think we both had named it. I forget if you
Go ahead, say it. It was my number 2 of the year.
Yeah, it was my number one. It was my number one. It was your number 2, but it was high. The point was they were both high.
Yeah.
And I know it took a lot of people by storm. I think it surprised a lot of people. I think, again, to your point, it was a welcoming battler in the sense not of gameplay being simple, in the sense of like overly simple that the family's just throwing it on the table and playing in 20 minutes, but it was easy enough to pick up and get immersed in. But now we're at a point where you're doing an expansion and you're introducing a lot of stuff. What I found fascinating, and I wanted to ask you about this, was outside of interesting new stuff, which we'll get into, you also made it so you could go back and experience the game again in a different way. So you added a complete replayability of the first scenario that is completely unique. And I'd be interested where that idea came from, because I don't think that's something I've really seen all that much. I see a lot of, okay, here's more stuff you want to keep playing. This literally reinvents the kind of first scenario, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I mean, not just the first scenario, but Off the Rails adds new gameplay elements to every scenario. Outside of like the one-off scenarios, but all of the core game, all of Encore are getting off the rails components and gameplay elements to it. And the reasoning behind that is that when we decided in the narrative approach that we were doing Vagrantsong, we knew that we were creating an experience that is probably best off as a one-off experience. We wanted people to get to the end of the game, and we wanted people to keep moving. That's why there's a fail forward system. But like the events, once you experience an event, when that's where that is, or anticipate when it's going to happen. So fighting against the flayed man over and over again, you're not going to have the same exact enjoyment out of that. There are some quite a bit of random elements, so there's certain things that you can't anticipate, which you'll find enjoyment in. But we knew that was a space that we were designing in, and later, once we were looking at expansions, we were looking at those scenarios and trying to see if there were ways that we could bring life into them. And we found out it was actually fairly easy. We could add new actions. We could add new rummage tokens for players to experience. We could add new events. We could tweak some rules. And sometimes little tweaks in these scenarios make huge impacts. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a tweak in the bookbinder scenario in particular that basically changes how you play it. And like the whole thing that you're trying to strategize around with just one line. So I'm excited to see what players think of the off the rails cards, and that's and how we approach them. It's and not only that, but we also knew that based on feedback after the game was released, we knew that some players were getting a little tired because of the length of the campaign, which is fair. I mean, it's 23 scenarios. It's like 40 hours of gameplay. So we looked at creating bite-sized chunks, something that is a little bit easier to digest. And that's where short trip mode came from. So you could play a chapter in a weekend instead of and getting a full campaign experience. And what's nice is that for players who do like the long campaigns, they can play multiple short trip campaigns, and they're going to get something even at the end of all of those. There is some connected tissue there. Because we want to accommodate as many players while still making sure that we're designing the game that we're designing, So
let me ask you this, because I know Vagrantsong has been such like a personal project for you. Like it's basically, an amalgamation of everything that you love in a box, right? How was that? How was your experience with? I mean, how was, as much as you could tell us, how was your experience about developing that within a team setting, with the team at Weird?
So the majority of the core development was me and one other individual, Matt Carter, and basically what we were doing is we were predominantly working on Malifaux. That was our flagship project at the time, and for the first 2 years, we were just like every Thursday or so, we would spend a few hours just brainstorming what Vagrantsong could be. And collaborating on that. And it doesn't. It's not just like an overnight thing of finding where we're both meshing or we both see the project to be. It did take time, but I think that spending that time, the 2 years in brainstorming, I think did the game a lot of wonders, because once we actually got into the development of it, it only took us 8 months to actually start building the thing. And in those 2 years, we've kind of figured out how to work with one another, what each other is good at. Matt is an excellent puzzle designer, so that's where you see a lot of the puzzle elements in the game. Whereas, I leaned into the narrative stuff a little bit more and that sort of stuff. So we followed each other's strengths and picked each other up when it came to weaknesses, and here we have it. With Encore and in Off the Rails, I now have a new team of developers that are helping me out, which is great because they're providing a unique perspective, each one of them, and they're already experienced with the game, so they already have an understanding of what the game is, and all of them had ideas about where the game could go. And we were able to branch out because in an expansion, it's like, well, I mean, let's throw in those bells and whistles that we might have scrapped or that we couldn't accomplish in the core game. Let's see how far we can stretch this system. It was basically just open communication of where do we want these scenarios to go? What do we want to see? Anyone have a wild idea that they want to throw in here? Can it work? Let's see if we can. So basically, everyone it was basically an open forum of ideas for the expansions. But I think that answered your question. I kind of got into ramble mode there. Sorry.
No,
it seems appropriate though that again you're talking about collaboration in a game where that is a cooperative experience. You are working together, right? By the way, Girly Gamer is here. Did mention 8 months is an amazing amount of from a perspective is a really impressive number. And then Rex had been, by the way, asked everyone's favorite Vagrant. I already said my favorite, by the way, is the Runaway. So I don't know if you have a favorite.
So it's kind of tough because I actually really like the Songsmith, and I haven't played at all yet as the Songsmith. I think that's actually the only character I haven't played as yet. But I really like when I play with other players that use the Songsmith. I like, oh, that's cool. So yeah. Plus, he's got a harmonica, and I like playing harmonica. Yeah. So can't go wrong with that.
The Songsmith is usually my answer too. This time I'm going to say the Curse Bearer. Honestly, it changes on the day for me, whether like favorite hand, favorite Vagrant. I really like the Curse Bearer. I like the glass cannon melee sort of style that she's got, and her backstory is inspired by one of my favorite horror movies, It Follows, where we've got this demon chasing her across the world, and she just happens to run onto a ghost train.
I'll pull that up right here. And Empress too, was that not based on someone? I feel like I read somewhere that was based on an actual.
The Empress is loosely based on Emperor Norton. You could look him up a little bit. He was a famous hobo in San Francisco in like the 1840s, I want to say.
Yeah. And then Rex is saying that he really loves the Revivalists. And I feel like that's the one character that if I'm playing it in a large player count, I would like to do the Revivalist. In small, I have not been able to figure out how to make the revivalists as exciting,
Yeah,
That's just
no,
me.
I mean,
Yeah,
it depends on the skills that you get, and the combinations and synergies.
sure.
There's some stuff that the revivalist outright breaks in the game. I won't let you know those things. Find
No,
those out on your
don't,
own.
Don't.
don't. We'll discover them.
But that brings me to one point that I was speaking to a little bit before, which is replayability. And so you've got all these characters, which can change the way you play, right? Different experiences. But the other thing that you did, I think, in with this expansion based on what's on the Kickstarter page, and again, we have not experienced any of it. Just for anyone watching, so we're looking at the Kickstarter page just like you, but you've had a lot of like these little things. You've got more skill cards. You've added you added a poker deck that can make things a little bit more interesting in camp.
Mm-hmm.
You've really added a few, those kind of modular things in that can ramp up the game for those who want that different experience. Of course, everyone's going to welcome the new junk cards and all those other things. There's no question, but it looks like you really did try to balance that. So when you talk about some of these extras that you added into the game, those things that maybe you wanted the first time around, and maybe some of these new ideas, can you talk a little bit about that development and how you had worked as a team to come up with what would make the kind of final product?
Sure. Yeah. As far as like taking an old idea and putting it back into the game, Save Your Soul scenarios were originally planned for the core game, but due to development time, scheduling, development costs, and a dozen other factors that go into developing a game, ultimately we ended up scrapping the concept. And once we realized that we were doing an expansion, we revisited that concept and a few others, and some are still in the game or in the expansion now, and a lot ended up on the cutting room floor. But Save Your Souls scenarios in particular were one of those darlings that I wasn't really quite ready to kill just yet. And basically, what those are deep dives into the character's lore. And the way that they function is that if you play the runaway, Chris,
Yep.
so let's say you went westbound 3 times through a scenario. Well, each time you go westbound, now you're going to have a new moment to read, and that's going to have a little bit of information based on the character's background or kind of how they think or function, and then eventually you can still play the character, but they're going to start off westbound if you decide to play them until you attempt their Save Your Soul scenario, and you're going to experience a little bit more of a deep dive into something that's kind of holding them down. And as players and friends, they're going to be lifting you back up, so to speak, by completing the rituals and going through, the Vagrantsong motions and trying to um, pull you back from the depths of the train.
I
So
I love that because it also adds that it's just that little extra layer of dimension, that kind of rounds out a character. And to your point, it's there's these characters have a really interesting history if you actually read what you've written. They're not just a piece on the board, right? So I think that's really cool, that you've kind of added that. And if I have that mode understood correctly, also to save that character, you also can potentially be playing as someone else to do that rescue. So you also get to try another character in the
right.
process of maybe helping to rescue your own.
Yeah, I mean, Vagrant Song is a fully cooperative game. We briefly toyed around with the idea of doing like a one versus many sort of system with Save Your Soul scenarios, but it felt like the wrong space to do it in. So basically, yeah, you're going to have to play a new character for that scenario. The good news is that all those skills and the junk cards from the Runaway, for example, they aren't lost. You're just going to put those in the belongings for now. Um, and then you might have to pick up the Empress or something like that for the scenario. But the story is that all these vagrants exist on in the narrative. It's just certain characters are only out at a single time. So um, they've each got each other's back. Um, but to further elaborate on your question that you had, there's one element in the game that so I talked about like stretching the limitations of the systems in the game. WizClip is one of those elements where I think we're stretching it as far as it can go. And WizClip is a hint in the Off the Rails expansion, but he doesn't have his own scenario. Basically, he's an optional module that you can add to your campaign. And the way he functions is that you're just going to add a moon token to the bindle, just one little moon token. And if it gets drawn, WizClip comes out. You have he's going to have an action he's going to perform. He's going to have a ritual that you have to perform, and then you have to do that a series of times throughout your campaign, and then you actually get to unlock him as a summonable character that can help you out. So
cool.
That's neat.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just another complication that gets added to the scenarios that you might have already played, for example. So again, it adds that mix of replayability without having to overwhelm players with a boatload of new rules, you know?
Jeez. Man, I just want to go play right now.
There's something we have to bring up though, because you talked about, Ryan,
What?
the fact that he's the passion that Kyle has for this, and one of the things I've noticed, and you were very excited about this, and you just had it up on the screen. If you scroll up,
it did.
You know what I'm getting at, right?
Nope,
okay, keep scrolling up.
Scrolling.
Keep
Oh,
scrolling
boy.
up. There you go.
Yeah.
So I saw you talk about this recently, and this must have been really neat for you because you're a fan of this musician, and you got to bring his music into the promotion, got to bring him as a character into the game. Like, talk about this experience, because I'm going to be personally admit I'd never heard. I was not as familiar. Sure. But he's definitely really enjoyed, like, the music fits so well with everything that was being presented, I know, in the videos I saw. So talk about this, bringing in Amigo the Devil.
I mean, honestly, still pinch me. Like, I can't believe that this is happening. So I'm such a huge fan of this musician, Amigo. I've seen him live once. His records were basically on repeat during the development of Vagrantsong. I could gush and fanboy all night about this guy. I love his music. And we were working on the encore trailer, or like piecing together the outline of it, right? And we were just kind of spitballing what kind of music we wanted to do. Do we want to just revisit the old music that we had? And then I just, in an offhanded comment, said, Dreamland, why don't we wouldn't it be awesome if we can get Amigo the Devil? And then, unbeknownst to me, my boss reached out to him, you know, and then they said yes. And like, what is happening? Like, I couldn't believe that this stuff was happening. And then on top of all that, they were like, yeah, why don't we make a scenario based on the guy? And like, are you kidding me? Of course I'll do this. And like overnight, I put something together, and yeah, it's unreal. So his scenario is, I don't want to spoil too much, but essentially he's manifesting a lot of the songs that he's written over the years, and using those to pull in souls for the shadowy presence that's in the game. If you've ever read Moment 13, I think you might have met that character. But yeah, so I'm still flabbergasted that this is actually happening. Yeah.
This is why I had to ask. I had to ask you, Kyle, because I saw you talk about this. I could kind of see it just in the words you were typing, just how cool this was for you. And it is. I can only imagine. It's like, oh, can you write me a scenario? I can just see it in your mind. Yeah, I'm gonna go work on that right now. It's
right?
Like,
yeah.
What do you want? What was it? What was a, you know, from? I gotta ask, what was his reaction to like this world and like the scenario? Like, just was he participatory and involved, or just kind of like, yeah, cool, I'm here to help? You know, what was that experience like?
So to be completely honest with you, I haven't actually worked with him directly on it. There's you know, my the producer
Right.
and the owner of the company. They're working with, you know, their publicist, and you know, it's normal business stuff, you know,
Yeah.
ultimately. But I like to imagine that he looked at Vagrant Song and was like, "Hey, cool," you know, like this
Yeah.
is in. Like he said yes, right? So obviously, or maybe he's into it. I hope. But crossing fingers, you know, like it's happening, right? So
I can
I
just
don't
see
know.
now when you go to like his concert at his merch booth, it'll be like T-shirts, posters, board game.
Yeah,
It
no,
would make for a really cool concert shirt actually with this look. So yeah.
That would be pretty cool.
Girly Gamer, by the way, saying love a co-op over PvP style. And yeah, I feel it. By the way, I do want to say something you said earlier. I'm really glad you made that decision for the Save Your Souls of it staying co-op, because I do
Yeah.
think that's at the heart of the game. So I think that
right.
it's just a good decision. But I agree there.
Now Danielle joined the chat too, and she mentioned the art for this game looks so nice. So I want to talk about, because obviously, uh, you know, when I found out about this game, part of the reason that pulled me in was how striking the art was and how different the components were in a dungeon crawl miniature fested world. Which I know there's miniature add-ons for this
We are weird
game.
miniatures, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
hard
right.
for us
You
to
are weird
not.
miniatures, but I love the decision for standees. I
Right.
like the acrylic standees feels like a perfect fit for this game, in my opinion. But going back to like the art, the direction for that vibe, what was that process like? Were you working directly with the artist in terms of kind of conveying the world of Vagrant Song, or was that more of a collaborative effort? Like,
Yeah, so Vagrant Song is one artist, Snippy, and she's incredible. Actually, not to there's one art piece that's not hers, for full clarification, but 99.9% of it is her, and it wasn't immediate, the rubber hose style. When we were originally developing the game, we actually went through three or four different styles, trying to find the heart of the game. I know early versions looked like Mike Mignola's Hellboy, with those really strong black shadows. We had a wood carved version of the game. We had. Do you remember the Ghostbusters? I mean, forgive me. I forgot who I was talking to for a second. You remember the Ghostbusters cartoon? We had
yes,
a style that was very similar to that at one point.
okay,
But ultimately, it was actually I think I mentioned him earlier, Matt Carter. Um, he just brought up Rubber Hose, and it's like, well, yeah, we're making a game that's roughly in the 1930s. That makes too much sense. And we pitched the idea to Snippy, and she drew up some characters, and almost all of the characters were first pass. Like, yes, do that. Like, we didn't have to
wow,
ask for any adjustments. She just got it, and we just knew from that point after seeing it, it's like, this is the game. Uh, in this style, we can accomplish the spooky humor vibe that we're trying to go for. You know,
yeah.
like the game is certainly dark, but it doesn't always take itself super seriously. And this art just was able to capture that.
Yeah, honestly, like 10 out of 10 decision on that. To be perfectly honest,
Yes.
because you're right. It complements the game so well. In a game that's so narrative driven, the art is incredibly important.
Right.
And in this game in particular, how like all the different haints and how they interact. You know, like just seeing how you know like for example, I can't wait to see. Oh man, where is that picture? I'm on your Kickstarter page right now. Like I can't wait to see like Grill Dad over here. You know, like,
Oh yeah.
and that's the thing too. So I know you've been engrossed in the updates. I am trying to not read the updates because I don't want to spoil anything. I want to just dive in and just see
Okay.
everything in here. but
So
I
you don't
can't
want
wait
me
to
to
see
talk
Cobra.
about that chef there? You don't want me to tell you what inspired him or anything
Sure,
like that?
sure.
Okay, so that's the Dungarvan Whooper. It's a Canadian ghost actually, and
Okay.
the original story of the character is he was a young chef at a lumberjack or lumber camp. Um, a bunch of the lumberjacks left the camp, and it was just him and his boss. The Whooper had a money belt, so back in the day, wallets weren't really all that popular, but belts with kind of fanny packs essentially were more popular, and he kept his on him, and his boss ended up killing the guy, burying him in a shallow grave. And now in this forest, you can hear his whoops. So we have this like banshee chef sort of character, and we took a lot of those elements and those. You're going to experience that in the game. I won't spoil the gameplay stuff for you.
Sure,
How about
sure.
that?
I do like that again, and I will note. I think because obviously there are you've introduced a lot of different stuff in this that people will be able to get. You did introduce the miniatures as an add-on that people will be able to get, but you also added the acrylics for the westbound vagrants and these other states. So you really have given everyone an option to play the way they want to, and ultimately that's what I like about this in the way it's been kind of executed. Uh, Talk to me a little bit about the biggest difference, if any, between the first time you pushed out Vagrantsong and tried to get the interest and make this a thing, right? Versus now what you have to do with with this built-in audience who is interested or has heard about this through word of mouth with an expansion. What's the biggest difference this time around?
So Vagrant Song is kind of an anomaly, I think, in the board game space. So there's kind of this mantra that even if you have a successful game in the board game space, if it has legs that stretch out to 5 months, awesome. And we've been extremely fortunate in that Vagrant Song has stayed on the radar for so long. And I mean, we're the core game went through 5 reprints within a year. Like I couldn't believe that happened. And in building the expansions, we basically pushed our marketing a lot more. As a company, we previous to Vagrant Song, we predominantly leaned heavily on word of mouth, which is arguably the best type of marketing, but it's also the riskiest because you have to anticipate that people are going to talk about it. But that's how Malifaux actually ended up growing, is predominantly through word of mouth. It's like, hey, go check out this game. Um, but this was the first one that we really put a lot of pressure on getting it out into people's, YouTube content creators and that sort of thing. And with the expansions, we doubled down on that. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience. I've been learning a lot. I've never considered myself like a marketing person, but it's a really interesting thing to learn, and how to market your games and how to get in front of the right people. You know, like there's content creators that predominantly lean on euros, and that's just not our audience. As much as I'd like a good euro, that they're we're making a dice chucker.
Yeah.
There's no denying that.
Right.
So putting it in front of that audience wouldn't do us any good. So trying to target the right people has been a really interesting learning experience. We've made some mistakes, but you learn from those. And part of the marketing process is putting it on Kickstarter. Honestly, it gets it in front of more people. Um, Expansions are a risk traditionally in the board game space. Some can take off, and others might not even be recognized or known that they exist. So, in one aspect, Kickstarter helped us get it out there a little bit. But we've shown it off at Gen Con and in conventions. Um, Yep, back into rambling territory. Sorry, guys.
I will say conventions, the because I noticed this about games at conventions, and PAX Unplugged is one where obviously we got the opportunity to see you last year, but some games stand out, and this is one of those games that does kind of jump out at you and makes you want to stop. And you're there, you're doing demos. They're obviously, I know, long days, but you're there doing demos, and I swear you're there all day. Like I walk by.
I am. Yeah.
I don't know when you went to go get food or something. I have to assume you did at some point, but constantly there, and you're talking to everybody. So to the point, your word of mouth methodology, it still seems to be at the core of it. But I consider it the fact that you're really just trying to have conversations with other human beings and just say, hey, this is my game, check it out. And to me, I think that personalization goes a long way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, and you're right. I was there pretty much. If there's a convention I'm at and we're showcasing Vagrantsong, I'm demoing from open to close, which I'm not complaining about. I mean, my voice complains about it, but I love it. I really enjoy talking to people about the game and showing how it works and that sort of thing. And my favorite thing during a demo is flipping over the Vagrant card. Like, whoa, West, I could turn into a ghost. That's that reaction. I will never get sick of. But as far as word of mouth, I mean, like once it's out of my hands, right, and like people are playing it and then they're recommending it and that sort of thing. That's a tough beast to tackle, and we've been really fortunate in that regard for sure. And like I said, like it's the best type of, it's the most reliable, or not reliable. It's probably the best type of marketing to get legs under your game, but you can't rely on it because regardless of if your game is any good, that's just such a too much of a risk to lean too heavily on.
Right. I mean, I feel like with board games in particular, a lot of us board gamers, myself I guess included, become kind of evangelists of the hobby because it's a hobby that kind of is asking other people to join it. So there were many times where I evangelized Vagrantsong. I remember actually at PAX Unplugged last year, I think there was people passing by and I actually was like, hey, check this out. Like, like I think you just have to wait. I'm like, no, this is how you play the game. And
oh yeah, you did.
I like did a demo.
Actually, I can speak to this. Because I went over and I was looking at Bayou Bash, because I ended up picking up Bayou Bash at that time, and I just remember you were there and turned around and he was teaching the game to somebody. And I was cracking up. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not Kyle. Yeah. And he was there too. So you do create these people who are able to do that, and I do think those demos are critically important for that reason. I think
absolutely,
you've got a chance to see what it plays like. You get a taste of it. Sometimes that's all you need is a taste, and then now you want that game, and it works. So
yeah, I bought a copy so one of the guys we've been playing with, I bought him his own copy for his birthday, but I haven't given it to him yet.
Yeah,
so it's like on my shelf. Like,
yeah,
I trust me. I got you a gift.
Yeah. I was gonna bring up. So Girl Gamer did ask if they're based on real stories or fictional. You kind of hit on this a little bit before. A lot of them come from your, at least originally, a lot of them coming from your kind of your life and your love of the horror stories. But it sounds like some of the newer ghosts have these. Some of the newer haints have these backgrounds to them that have some real world stories to them. So it's really a nice mix of original and existing.
So yeah, we pulled excuse me. It's water time.
Oh, no worries.
No, go for it.
Go ahead. And by the way, if anyone want to ask any questions too in the chat, you're more than welcome to. Just drop
please.
Them in.
Yeah, feel free to drop them in the comments.
But yeah, so it's a pretty balanced mix of, like Girly Gamer says, real ghost stories versus new creations. And some ghost stories we did take liberties with, like the Bell Witch, for example, is a fairly famous poltergeist story, but she doesn't have a bell. She's haunting the Bell family, for example. So we kind of warped that story a little bit to kind of fit the narrative of um, uh, what's spoiler territory at this point for the core game. Can I talk about like the specifics of the narrative direction of certain things, or yeah, why not? Right?
I mean, I guess for us it's okay, but I mean, it's whatever you think. If you're saying a spoiler that is gonna ruin someone into buying the game, maybe not, right?
Okay, so it's not a major thing,
Okay.
but in the Bone Orchard chapter, there are bells you can find in one scenario that tie into another scenario that later lead to bells in the Bell Witch. Uh, but we knew we were doing a graveyard story in that chapter, um, and bells were used in graves for a long time. They would, run a string through the grave itself, so that if they incorrectly buried someone who might have been alive, they could ring the bell. That was a thing that happened, and
Yeah.
reading that the first time just blew my mind. But that's why, like, you could see that in Suffocation Station, why you could see that in Bookbinder, and why we ended up looping that into the Bell Witch, for example. Um, so yeah, in some instances we took some liberties. Some instances we created the monsters. Like Man of Many Limbs is my version of Frankenstein's monster. That's a wholly unique character, but is still inspired by something. Um, 13th of Leeds, though, is our version of the Jersey Devil. Um,
Is this a Mothman one that I'm seeing? Like,
do you want to know? Do you
well,
is
I
are
don't
you?
know. Is it?
So
Is it moth person?
there's two moth characters there,
Okay.
and yes, both of them are expanding upon the Mothman mythos
Cool.
in some way.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of theories about the Mothman, and we essentially took one of them and ran with it,
Oh, cool.
and kind of elaborated
I
on.
love this stuff, by the way, because again, I have like my own supernatural podcast outside of this, and I always get to be the one who talks about the monsters. So as I dig into the lore of like I in my head I'm thinking of, oh, this would be a cool hint. Like the lady in white is there's this whole concept of this woman who's always on this, who gets young men off the side of a street to come back to her house, and then and long story short, like there's all these really creepy things in supernatural lore that I think I was thinking about this the other day. This could be a good hint. But Rachel, by the way, chiming in, per the
For
bells,
string that they tie it to their toes.
Yeah.
Rachel is full of knowledge. I have learned this.
Yeah.
She is dropping knowledge constantly for us. If people do have questions, of course, for Kyle, by the way, please drop them in the comments. We don't want to keep Kyle all night, but if you have questions, we do want to make sure we bring them forward. Kyle, I did want to bring up, obviously, this has 7 days left as we're recording this. But what would your message be to people who are considering if this game, is for them and might be something that they're interested in, and if they having maybe never played it? Because you've got pledges all the way from base game add-in to all in, and so you've got every level of capability to get this game to their table. But what would you tell people who are trying to ask that question, is this game for me?
Well, I mean, first you have to understand what the game is. In full transparency, if you don't like randomness, this might not be your game, and that's okay. But if you like unique challenge, if you like dynamic scenarios, if you like ghost stories, if you like campaign games that don't feel like they're going to stretch out 2-3 years long, this might be the game for you. And our Kickstarter is extremely flexible. There's pledge levels for if you haven't started, if you've already been knee deep in it, if you just want to go in at $1 to kind of check things out on the add-on side of things, or the pledge levels. We just did an all-in pledge today. So if you want to dive in 10 feet right away, you can do that. So it's really it's built around your own comfort level and where you want to go.
I
And I
was
mean, if
excited.
you
I
want
saw
to
a big
test it,
box. I'm just gonna
yeah,
say I saw it.
yeah,
It's on the stretch goals, if I'm not mistaken. So
yep.
Oh,
But I
we got to
mean, you
get
can
to that one.
also you can go to your local game store. The core game is out right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Or it's on YouTube if you want to watch someone play it. If you want to watch you guys play it, right? You guys have a video up,
We've done
so
3 of them, yeah.
Yep.
yeah.
And a teach.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the information is out there. It's just a matter of you exploring it. If it's your kind of thing, awesome. And if it's not, that's okay too. Um, I'd rather design a game. Personally, I'd rather design a game that um, people either love or hate. I don't want people to be lukewarm about the experiences that I make. So um,
I will note I love the plushies that you add in.
It's so
I'm
yeah,
now required to get plushies for my children. I was told if need be, and they're at PAX Unplugged, I will need to return. I always get them something at PAX Unplugged, so I may have to come back for plushies. Because they love the my daughter saw a plushie in the Kickstarter screen one day and said I like that. So, um, by the way, we did have one question, and I when it comes down
Oh.
to it, this is probably a long way out, but is there as far as you see it, you're in the middle of one, you're probably nothing that far ahead, but do you think there's more to this game, essentially, is kind of, I think, what the question really is. And Kyle, Rex, I should say, notes that would you ever consider something other than a train?
so I can't answer that question.
Oh.
So I'll leave that open ended for you to interpret however you want.
I love that.
Um, but I will say that I have full transparency. I have difficulty letting go of this game. As you both have kind of already covered, this game is a passion project of mine. It's something that's extremely close to heart. And um, during when I finally wrapped up the core game, um, I I nerded out and made a playlist of every like a song to represent every character because I still couldn't let go, you know. So thankfully, people still wanted more stuff. So I'm extremely grateful for that, and I had a blast the last year and a few months of developing these two expansions. We've got the dog catcher scenario that's in the Kickstarter. We've got the Amigo scenario. So the potentiality of us creating more content is really up to the players. If you all want more content, tell my boss. And
Rachel's suggesting a steamboat.
huh?
Steamboat could be
I'm just
cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never heard that idea, and I don't have any comment at all. That's is all I can say.
Oh man. No, look, I gotta say, we do appreciate it. Like I said, and we appreciate your time. I want to just make a note too, because we're really grateful, quite frankly, because we've had the opportunity. You've been a part of. You've called in on Call Aboard, our live call-in show. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, we do a live call-in show twice a month. That you can be a part of the show. You've called in, you've been a part of our community, and we really do appreciate it. And obviously, when it comes down to it, we've been transparent. We're fans of this game,
Yeah.
but I feel like getting that history. This is the reason we do this. This is the reason the channel ever was created in the first place. Getting those stories behind it, and like like Girly Gamer was talking about, it's really neat to hear that kind of story of like, yes, some of these are based off real, but other stuff came from your life. So that inspiration is really neat. So thank you again. We appreciate your time. I don't know if you have any other questions that you want to bring forward.
No other questions, but I do want to clarify. When so I found out personally about this game when I saw the Dice Tower cover it and I saw their video, and I'm like, man, could this be the white whale I've been chasing? Is this the best Ghostbusters board game on a table? Because I'm a diehard Ghostbusters fan. It is not, but I still but I love it more than any other Ghostbuster game I played for sure, which is not a high bar personally.
No, that's not a high bar at all.
But I love this game. I'm so excited to keep playing it some more. It's one of those games where whenever I talk about it, I just want to go back into playing it.
Yeah.
Which, there's certain games that fill that, spot for me, and this one for sure is in that spot. So thank you for making it a great game, and I love playing it. And I will ask your boss when I see him at Unplugged to just keep making it.
Yes. Before you go, a question that I have always asked people on this show is, you talked about just diving in. You talked about just kind of, you took a shot at an opportunity and you ran with it. And here you are 7 years later, as you said. What do you say to those people who say, man, I've got an idea. I've got this. I really would love to make a game about X, Y, or Z. Doesn't matter what the topic is. It could be about climbing a tree to get a coconut, crack it up, and get the milk. I don't know. Whatever you want to make your game about, right? That would be a bad game. That's an awful theme. But the point is, what advice do you give to those people who maybe are thinking about that, and that's just on the back of their mind, and it's just they haven't done anything yet?
So it depends on what they're looking for, right? So if they just want to, make a game that's like a print and play thing or something with their friends, take it casually, take it slow, keep iterating. Don't be afraid of failure. If you look at my career, it was failure, Vagrantsong. So just know that that's inevitable, and you learn from those experiences. Doing game design does change the way you look at games. So just kind of be aware of that. It is a job, and for me personally, I love games, but I look at them from a very analytical lens at this point. I look at the pieces, I look at the parts of the machine and how it gets built at this point, and it's fairly difficult for me to get immersed into it. So just if that's the thing that you're interested in, if you like to make things, do it, and don't be afraid of doing it. Know that the last 10% of development is 90% of the work, and get over that hump. Because even if your game is crud, completing a game is such an incredible milestone. So I guess ultimately you have to figure out if it's a thing you want to do, or if it's things you're kind of just toying around with, and just set up your own expectations based on that. But if you want to go whole hog in, it can change the way you look at it. And to me personally, I like the way that I look at games now. I've always been a tinkerer, a creator, and that sort of thing, and that's where I find my own personal enjoyment. So I guess your mileage may vary. That's all scattered advice I'd give you.
Well,
spot on.
We appreciate it, and I will just remind everybody, Vagrantsong at the time of this recording is on Kickstarter for 7, soon to be 6 more days. You can go check out Vagrantsong for the Vagrantsong expansion on there. So make sure you go check that out and see if that's going to be interesting for you. I will note, and I can link this after the fact once this video registers, that we have a playthrough and a teach here on our channel, of course. So I'll make sure we change it up so that video plays for you at the end of this. But other than that, Kyle, I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us here on the Tabletop Express. It's always a pleasure, and we certainly hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Oh, wait, I can't hear you. I think I'm blocking you out. There you go. Now say it.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, there you go.
I love your channel.
No worries. Bye. Thank you.